I think for people like you who obviously are concerned about and interested in helping people who are in need of the one thing that enhances their somebodiness, a home. And maybe most of you have never been there. I have. And I have been able to see in my own family, what home ownership does. I say to my family when we have our annual family reunion, I say to them, there are 10 Cleaver kids of two brothers, 10 first cousins. And I said, when we were kids playing out in the yard, people driving up and down the street would have never thought that all 10 of those kids are going to graduate from college. Sitting out in the front yard of public housing, somebody would have driven by and said, boy, it's sad to see all those kids, same family. Wonder how many of them are going to go to prison. I wonder how many of them are going to end up on drugs. Nobody would have thunk that there were 2 PhDs out there playing. Somebody who ended up as the mayor of the largest city in the state of Missouri. Now, let me tell you that I associate that transformation into a couple of things. One, my father, who did not have a college degree, somehow had it in his head that it was important to get his kids into a home. And so my dad worked as a maitre d'. Now, I'll deal with this in a minute. No training. He became the maitre d' of one of the wealthiest private clubs in the state. So he served as a maitre d' 6 nights a week. And on Saturday mornings, he cleaned up the office building, the T.A. Littleton and Sons construction building, cleaned up their office, and then served parties, private parties. And so he did 3 jobs. He bought a house in a white neighborhood. We couldn't live there, so he had the house moved. We had to move on the east side of town because we could buy the house, but my father had to agree in writing that he would move the house, which we did. We moved the house. My father woke up in it this morning, and if you look at the house, you'd never believe that it wasn't built there. And you look at the yard, which is usually among the 10 top lawns of the summer. And my father, it was amazing. It hasn't rained in the Dallas area in 5 years. It is a legitimate drought, maybe the worst ever. So water is rationed. You can only wash your cars on Fridays. You water your lawns based on the alphabets. My father has the greenest yard in town, and he takes pride that they can't catch him. There's a $500 fine, and if he were here, he'd tell you, yeah, they come out at all times of day or night. He said, they just can't catch me. He said, I can outsmart them any time. And so I think he wears them down, and then he goes out and waters his yard. But what he did was working these jobs. He sent my mother to college when I was in the 8th grade. My father never, ever, not one time, not one piece of a time, talk to my sisters, nor did my first cousins, about going to college. When we moved into that home, my daddy's somebodiness exploded. The lawn had to be perfect. Nothing in the streets nearby his house, nothing. Not a cigarette butt, not a little piece of paper. Home ownership. You look at the people in college. You do just a windshield survey of people in college. The overwhelming majority of them came from homes, not rental units. We need rental units. They came from homes. You go to prison, talk to people in prison. They didn't come out of homes. Now, many of the people in this country, maybe even in this room, take home ownership for granted. And everybody is not going to do what my dad did. There are people who are going to need help. The economy has changed. Now, my father will say to you, if he were here, I can outwork any man that you bring in front of me. And he could. Except that, you know, we have had a structural change in the U.S. economy. You can't even get a job if you haven't mastered the computer to some degree. You can't get a job on the Hill at all, because if you apply for a job on the Hill, you have to apply online. So the world has changed. There was no Habitat for Humanity when we were coming along. That's why we lived in a shack. I didn't live in a house with running water or electricity until I was 7. There are a lot of people out there who live in houses now without electricity. My dad owns 7 rental properties, and one of the families has not had electricity going on a year. Now, my dad has allowed them to stay in the house, even though, you know, they are so far behind on rent that he'll never get it. And so there are still people out there who need help. And I believe that's why God invented Habitat for Humanity. Now, I know you're going to say God didn't do it, but it's a matter of theology. Which reminds me, and hopefully, I want you to remember this because it's profound what I'm getting ready to say. You probably have heard people say, well, you know, we're glad for the little work you're doing, but, you know, the Bible says that the poor shall always be with you. Dumb, ignorant, stupid, not true. And the gospel, my degree is in theology. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, the poor shall be with you always. But you have to understand, Jesus, all through the Christian Testament, is quoting the Hebrew Testament. You know, he corrects Moses. You've heard it said of old, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, but I say unto you. He'll quote Moses quite a bit. He'll quote Isaiah, Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's quoting Hebrew Testament. And when he says, and the poor shall be with you always, he is quoting Hebrew Testament. And it is important I think, for you to know that as he is quoting Hebrew Testament, we have messed up and perverted the words that I think are so important to the work that you're doing. He's quoting Deuteronomy 15:11. Now, what he's saying is, the poor you will always have with you, Matthew 26. 15:11 of Deuteronomy says, since there will never cease to be some in need on earth, I therefore command you, open your hand to the people and needy neighbor. He's quoting, actually, Moses is generally believed by scholars to have read the book of Deuteronomy. So he's quoting Moses. Yeah, there never will cease to be some in need. And then he paraphrases it in Matthew 26. So he's saying, open your hands. Open your hands. Give help to your needy neighbor. And that, my friends, is what you do. And that, my friends, is what you were commanded to do. And what this nation needs you to do. Even at a time when this nation is politically just going slowly off a cliff, there still is a need for men and women who wake up in the morning with the sole goal of helping somebody, of putting somebody in a home, and who gets joy when they hand over the keys to someone walking in their own home. I know. I know experientially what it does. I've seen it in my own family. My daughter graduates from college. A month later, she's trying to buy a house. I mean, she equates that, like all of my children, with putting your life on a road to happiness and success. You need a home. And everybody can't own a home. And unfortunately, there are those who can and don't. As the ranking member, I've got to go and defend now FHA reducing its down payment, trying to make it more affordable. So why would I have to defend that? Because there are people who think that we need to have a down payment of 20%. Now, even you rich people would have difficulty coming up with 20% down payment. We've got to turn this nation around. Now, the people who are trying to take us in another direction are not mean and evil. They're misguided. And the only people who can touch them are people who've touched the lives of real people like you. I represent a rural area now. When I was first elected, I essentially just represented the urban areas: Kansas City, Independence, Raytown. Right there in Kansas City, I could drive around my district, in 45 minutes. Compared to some people who it will take them 9 hours to drive around their districts. My people were concentrated. So in an attempt to get me defeated, they redistricted me 4 years ago, and they put me into 3 rural counties. And so I went out, and they didn't realize it, but I knew a little about rural because where I had lived. But the one thing I found out that everybody in this country needs to realize, there is a symbiotic relationship between the people who live in the rural areas and the people who live in the city. And we just are ignoring it. Think about this. People in the cities, in many instances, they arrogantly live in the city. And only 21% of the people in this country live in rural communities. So we're having trouble. we're having trouble. When we do food stamps, the farmers make the money. They sell the food to the USDA that they provide for the poor. So we all work together, or we should. And as you continue your work, let me just encourage you. You have never been needed more than you are right now, at this moment. Now, I was approached by some people way back when we were doing the health care, and they were screaming at all of us as we were walking the walk. And so a woman yelled at me and said, "We want our country back. We want our country back." And in a moment of anger, I said, "Well, you can't get it. You can't have it. We're not going to give it back. We're never going back to the days when people were living in shacks without running water or electricity. We'll never go back to the days when nobody is running around the country trying to make sure that there's affordable housing. We're never going back where people in public housing are considered the slum folk of the country. We're never going back. And one of the reasons we're not going back is sitting here. The men and women in Habitat for Humanity. Humanity. Humanity is the word. And so you are making people stand up. You're giving them some somebodiness. I know my daddy got it. My sisters got it. My first cousins got it. And you keep giving it out.